Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is the food growing series. Today we are exploring herbs and food foraging and pollinators. And today is the April 23rd session. Unfortunately, we already sort of have begun. Sharon has already talked about comfrey and nettles, and now we are talking about catnip. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome. As I was saying, some of the reasons I really like catnip is because you can you can make tea and you can give it to any age group, babies, children, adults. It's a great nervine. It's great for cold and flus. It's easy to harvest. You can harvest the leaves and or the flowers or both of them together. But because it's in the mint family, you just want to be aware that it can sort of take over the area. I think plants that like where they are and are healthy and have survived this long with us have survived this long because they're very strong and healthy and have great ways of proliferating. So this is another one of those. I'll just go to my next slide. Oh, which I can't seem to do now since we
Maybe try enter.
No, now wow. I cannot get my screen to move now that we started recording.
Oh, so you may need to stop sharing and then start again. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, Sharon's trying to figure that out. There's another really bad weed called giant hogweed, and it burns. And if you get it in your eyes, it can blind you. And it grows along little rivers. I don't know if anybody knows where the Nith River is. The Nith River comes out of New Hamburg, Ontario, and it crosses under the 401. And I guess it dumps into the Grand River eventually down near Brantford somewhere. But there's areas where this giant hogweed is all along the shore. Because a guy has it up, my brother knows this guy has it on his property, and he gets it right away in the spring and chops it all down. And then I guess it tries to regrow and he just keeps mowing it down. So anyways, you want to get into giant hogweed. You'll get burnt or very irritated eyes. Okay.
Thank you. Sharon, I muted you just because we could hear you talking in the background. So I didn't know if you're having a private convo. So you're muted. Yes, back. It changed to nettles. There we go. So maybe stop sharing and, oh, there you go.
She can't unmute. Ask her to
unmute.
unmute.
Okay, yeah.
So she's like on her phone.
Did that? Okay, there. You can hear me.
Yes.
So that's weird. So I lost my ability to find a mouse. I can't get my mouse. So that's why I was running upstairs to find a mouse, and somehow I can't access that right now. But you can hear me. So we'll keep going. So excellent. Assuming I can. No, it won't do it again. Shoot.
It'll go back, but it won't go.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
This is okay. You sure you wanted to start recording now that we've had this many technical difficulties? Okay. All right. I'm calm, or it's all good. So one of my next favorite ones is FEVERFEW. Oh, I did write the Latin name. Okay. FEVERFEW is would make a really cute cut flower. It's like little daisy flowers. It grows really well, and it grows in a lot of locations. It's easy to save the seeds. What's really lovely about feverfew is a vasodilator. So if you are prone to headaches or migraines, you can just cut off the leaves fresh and put it in tea. You can dehydrate them. You can dehydrate the flowers as well. As said, frozen as well as something you can do. Usually it's early in the season, which is recommended, but funny enough, I just did the flowers in the fall and occasionally use that and find it very effective. It doesn't take much to have the sort of desired effect. The other nice things about it is if you don't do well, no, that's not true. I was going to say if you don't do well with daisies, but it's not in the daisy family. It's a natural antihistamine as well. It wouldn't do as well as a regular remedy like nettle would for that purpose, because it's not one that you would necessarily want to take as often as you could nettle. Nettle's a functional one you could have every day. I don't know that they would recommend that for feverfew unless you were doing it in a very mild dose. It also clears congestion. The only caveat to feverfew is they don't recommend it for pregnancy or women who are pregnant. Oh my God. Obviously I can't say that. Because it's a vasodilator, then it increases blood vessels, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not helpful for that. This one's a really cute one. I don't use it too much, but I find it really beautiful. It comes up in your lawn, self-heal or heal all. I love the name. It says a lot about it. It comes up in all kinds of places. It's a great one if you were out walking around and you cut yourself or you tripped and fell and scraped your knee. Much like, did I do plantain? I did plantain, but much like plantain as well, you could just put a couple of leaves, chew it up, make a poultice with your spit and apply it. And it would be able to sort of disinfect and seal and heal. So that's wonderful for that. And it's usually used like earlier on in the season, but I imagine in a pinch, you could use it anytime. Dandelion, we've spoken a lot about today. So I think I'll just maybe talk about some of the things that people may or may not know about. Is Anastasia was talking about it being great for the liver. For sure, those bitters, any of those bitters are great for stimulating digestion and cleaning out the liver. And I think that's one of Mother Nature's gifts to us after long sluggish winters. If we go out and collect some of those greens, it's the bitters are really great for the support. It's high in vitamins and minerals. You can take the roots up in the spring or the fall and dry them out and roast them, and it makes like a coffee substitute. So like a bit of a bitter tea as well, which I imagine, even though it's roasted, would have similar health properties for the liver. Every spring I go out and, well, not every spring, I'm exaggerating. Every couple of springs I'll go out because it's a lot of work, and I'll pick a whole bunch with some friends, some of the flowering heads. And then we come home and we do the painstaking remove all the petals from the base. So you get all the green parts and you just keep, as you see, like all the little yellow, like just the yellow parts of it. The flower, and I make dandelion wine out of that every year, which is a white wine, and I don't like wine, but I so adore the process of doing it that I do it anyway. And now it's turned into dandelion sherry. So it's still sitting in my fridge. So if anybody wants to try dandelion sherry, come on over, and I've got some in my fridge. One year I tried to, the first year I tried to do this, I had great fun because I went over to the wine store and I said, oh, I need some of the yeast that would help this, because I didn't do the first year I didn't do the natural method. I did get the yeast and add the yeast. And the woman at the store sold me some yeast that was good for champagne. So at 10:30 at night, one night, all of a sudden it sounded like my kitchen was exploding. because yeah, exactly. So the wine was no longer wine, it was champagne, and they popped their own corks because the fermentation was not actually done. And then it sounded like waterfalls, because all of a sudden, all the way down my pantry was this huge amount of wine everywhere. So needless to say, there was a bit of a cleanup party till about 1 o'clock in the morning. And we didn't drink any of it that year, but it made for a good story. So I'll share that as opposed to all the other stuff that we've already spoken about.
I know a guy in Kitchener that used to make dandelion wine, and he'd enhance it with that flavorless alcohol you can buy, 40% alcohol.
Oh my.
And I wasn't told anything, and I had a couple of glasses, and I hammered. Anyway.
No doubt, no
Yeah.
doubt. Plantain is similar to the self-heal in that it's easy to find, it's easy to recognize. You could make a salve with it, which would be very healing for cuts and scrapes. This one could be used also on open wounds, unlike comfrey. It would have that benefit, and you can you can remove just the leaves in spring and add them to your salad as well. And you can take the seed pods in the fall and dry the seed pods. It would take an awful lot of them, but you grind them and turn them into a flour. So you could do, and I wonder if you could make a flour out of them, if you couldn't make them into like a breakfast cereal with some warm water as well. So you'd have to collect them. You can sort of see the darker ones in the back on this. And what's the other things that I found out about plantain that I didn't know was it's great for fighting infections, also great for treating allergies and asthma, and it has a detoxifying effect on the colon and liver and draws phlegm out of the lungs. So it actually does a lot more than what most people commonly know, which is just like turning it into a poultice, which is kind of great.
It's also good when you have mosquito bites. You wrap it with the plantain. It reduces the itchiness. And those who take blood thinners cannot eat the salad of plantain because it has too much vitamin K.
Oh, I didn't know that, Anastasia. Cool. So those who aren't on blood thinners could use it as a source of vitamin K.
They shouldn't use it will solidify the blood more. It will be thickening.
Okay.
They shouldn't have the salads of it.
If you're on
if you're on blood thinner, you shouldn't eat it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Welcome.
This one's a new one for me, so I put it in there because I heard a biodynamic herbalist, Deb Soul, talk about this one a couple weeks ago, and I was just so enamored by the way she spoke about this plant. I'm going to try and find the seeds and grow it. It does grow in the wild for us. It can be found in sunny locations, and because it's a 4 or 5 foot tall herb. And what I loved about it was she was saying how it's so beneficial right now for the times that we're living in as a tea, because it's such an excellent nervine. And it's great for, like it says here, nervous exhaustion, shoulder and neck stress and tension, feelings of anger. So these were, I thought, she said, it's not one that most people commonly know, and it's not spoken of that often, but it does have a lot of benefits to it. Now, what I don't know is whether you do the flowers or the leaves. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to that, but I thought I would just introduce you to it, because if you were walking around and you saw it or you recognized it, do a little bit of research as well to see what would be. Oh, I said right there, you dry the leaves for tea. I should read my own notes. So you dry the leaves for tea. Oh gosh, I'm such an awesome presenter, eh? Anyway, so there you go. Use the leaves, and you can dry them up and see how that works if you suffer from any nervous tension, which I don't know why anybody would be suffering from any kind of nervous exhaustion these days, but just in case, it might be a good one to know that you can just go out and find. I think this was my last one. So motherwort was one I had heard about, but it just kind of, oh, I've got one more after this. It just showed up in my side garden, and they didn't really know much about it, but the leaves are so distinct that it makes it really easy to figure out what it is and not confuse it. It also has a square stem. It's in the mint family. So that makes it really easy to know. And what I love about this is that this particular one is helpful for calming heart issues, slowing a stressed heart, like the beating of a stressed heart. So it's good for anxiety. And it's also good for hot flashes. And some other menstrual disorders. So motherwort kind of lends itself, the name is like a mother to daughter kind of remedy, in that it's sort of self-explanatory that it does do actually all of women's issues with menstrual period irregularities and hot flashes and that sort of thing, and anxiety. So it's an easy one to recognize, and it's an easy one to tincture, because you can just sort of cut it down and chop it up into little bits, and a vodka tincture, and there you go. So I've started using that, and so far so good. I did a whole bunch of it and then promptly forgot that I had made a lot of it, and then promptly remembered. So now I'm trying it again, and it's been really good. So I'm happy with that. And it just showed up. That's kind of, I think, I always liked the idea when I had heard, if you just go out and look what's around you, Mother Nature is going to provide you the medicine you need. So in your backyard, if you look at what comes up and go check that out and see if it's a vibrational match for you, or an energetic match, or a healing match. Even just to sit with the plant and get to know it is therapeutic as well. So you don't have to cultivate it or eat it, but you can have the experience of it, and maybe you're learning it for somebody else. And lastly, another one that just showed up on my lawn. I absolutely love St. John's wort. It always comes up around Saint Jean Baptiste, which is the 24th of June. It's bright yellow flowers. Hypericum perforated is a lovely name, because if you take the leaves and you put them up to the light, you would see that all the little tiny leaves actually have holes in them. So it makes it easy to distinguish in that way, the 5-petaled flower and then the little perforated leaves. St. John's wort got a lot of popularity when it came for people who wanted to try and use it as an antidepressant. So it has the ability to work with the nervous system for anxiety, depression, irritability. It's easy to find, it's easy to recognize. You can make a tea or a tincture with it. And again, another really helpful nervine. And so those, I guess that's it. There's many more. I mean, burdock and creeping Charlie, and the list goes on and on and on, of like all the ones that I love and have worked with and have watched. And spring is my favorite season because they're all coming back. And so hopefully you'll find something in here, or at least go out and appreciate what might be around and see if there's medicine for you right in your own backyard. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That's all very great information and exciting information. And the St. John's wort, I started some last year, and then it didn't last the hardening off period. It got frozen. So I'm very excited about it this year. So those flowers are making me smile. So next we're going to go to David, and David is our guest presenter today. And he is going to be chatting about wild crafting food and foraging. So David, welcome. And you can,
Hello, everyone.
perfect. You can introduce yourself a bit and say a couple words before you get into it. It would be lovely.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been foraging for the last 10 years or so, and my experience is based, it's pretty localized, I guess. I've been coming to a property over the last 10 years in the Appalachians of southeastern Quebec. It's 240 acres. There's some fields where the horses and the donkeys graze, and otherwise a lot of it is being allowed to return to the wild. And we have woodlands, and there's the river and a bit of wetlands. And then I've been living here for the last couple of years. So a lot of my experience is right here. Although I was living in Montreal, and a lot of the plants that I've discovered here were also friends that I had in the city in my neighborhood downtown. So, and my inspiration for foraging was at the beginning with the idea that I'm just getting into gardening now. But before, my idea was, well, why am I growing plants when plants grow themselves? And I've since learned that there are some good reasons for that, it can be quite challenging to meet your needs by foraging alone. And there's very good reasons that, hunter-gatherers were semi-nomadic and they moved around. Like, my experience learning to forage has really opened my eyes to at least a little bit of what that lifestyle might have been, and would have required hunting as a source of calories. Meat would have been important, but really it's the fat from the animals that would have been a significant source of calories. And then also, a lot of the staples don't necessarily exist. The non-meat, the non-animal based staples don't exist or aren't prevalent in the areas that they would have been back in the day. So here, for example, acorns, oak trees would have been very prevalent, but they were all cut down a ways back for lumber. We've planted some oak trees, but of course they'll take some time to come back in numbers. But acorns would have been a really significant staple, and that's just not an option here as a staple, at least. Wild rice is another one, and many places would have been a staple. So I am starting to garden, but I still love my foraging. And so I just wanted to touch a little bit again. So I'm going to go over kind of my experience more generally with foraging, and then I'm going to introduce 3 of my plant friends. So just to kind of reiterate a bit of what Sharon was saying, my understanding, my approach to working with plants is that this is really about relationship building and community building. This is family. These are beings with bodies that are made of the earth, just like us in these incarnations are beings in bodies made of the earth. And with that approach, consent and communication are important. Like Sharon said, for me, I tend to like to open up, my intuitive side so that at least, if anything, if I get any red lights of like, nope, don't do that, I'm open to receiving that message. As for respectfully harvesting plants, my rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb that I've heard from others, is not to harvest more than 1/3. And generally the idea there is that, a third for me, a third for whoever's foraging and whoever they're foraging for, a third for other, wild animals, other beings that require these plants to sustain themselves, and then a third for the plant that you're foraging so that they can sustain themselves into the future years. Of course, there's other plants where you're going to want to forage even less, like we've mentioned, wild leeks. You're probably going to want to forage less, and ideally in areas where they're being managed. So ideally on like private property, even where it's being watched and cared for. Chaga is another one that I think it's a mushroom that grows out of birch trees and can be used medicinally. That's one that I think could be easily over harvested. But also, and so the other, so I don't take more than a third. And then also you kind of, when you look back, when you've harvested some, you kind of want to be able to look back and kind of not tell you were there. Like that's really the gold standard. If you look back and you're like, yeah, it kind of looks like when I arrived, that's amazing. And on the flip side of that, I'll say also that a lot of plants we've grown up with, we've evolved with, or on whatever level we have a reciprocal relationship with, or we have had, and we can reestablish it. And a good example of that is wild rice. I don't have experience personally harvesting wild rice, but I've heard accounts that wild rice does very well when humans are out there harvesting it. It helps it propagate itself. It helps it to spread its seeds, and the colonies of wild rice can be much larger, and the area that they can cover.
Uh-oh.
You're frozen.
Yeah, yeah. With his hands in the air. Oh.
Not only are they giving us food, but for me personally, they, as an adult, it gives me a context to walk through the forest and natural environments more slowly and look more closely. And a lot of my experience as an adult of like spontaneous wonder and gratitude come from those moments of looking a bit closer and seeing things that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So they have all sorts of gifts to share with us. I just wanted to go over some of the resources that I use that I think are amazing. When foraging, it's great if you have someone that knows what they're doing that can take you out and show you what to do. Even if that's the case, when I'm showing people, I always tell people, and I'm honest about my experience with them, but it's ultimately up to every individual what one chooses to put into one's body. You're responsible for what you put in your body, knowing that you're relying on resources, and these are also probably new foods, and so there might be intolerances or allergies that you were unaware of. So whether or not you want to risk that, or even consider it to be a risk, or however you look at that, that's something to keep in mind. If you are, I have for the most part relied on, in my learning about plants for foraging, relied on books. I recommend finding more than one source so you can kind of cross-reference and find people where what they're writing about is based on their personal experience. There has been, I think it's less so now, but I've heard them in the books that I use talking about having a bit of a hard time figuring out from the literature how to identify plants, and that being caused by a lot of armchair foragers, a lot of academic folks talking about plants, and so they're citing other people's writings and not necessarily talking about their own personal experience, which means that errors have in the past been propagated through the literature. And so, yeah, using resources that are based on people's personal experience is probably the best way to go. And so I use mostly two authors. I've got Samuel Thayer's books. So I have all the books I'm going to show you here. I have references on the conversation on the website for the growing for this series. I posted them last night, so I have references for all of those there. Samuel Thayer, though, he's really great. This is his first book. It's a little bit more focused on Eastern North America. He also has great stories, and there's a glossary for some of his the more technical terms, and some images to help you figure out how to identify plants based on descriptions that use some technical language. Yes, another book, and the first one is The Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden he came out with, and this one, after his biggest critique from the first book was that it did focus mostly on Eastern plants. So this one is representative of more North America more generally. So more Western plants, more central, more southern. This one has even prickly pear, which probably does not apply to Canada at all, but oh well. And then a great guy, he lives in Maine, not too far from me. I wish that I could go visit him, but obviously I can't in the last couple of years. But Arthur Haynes, Ancestral Plants, Volume 1, Volume 2. Volume 1 is available online through Amazon. Like there's a digital version. Volume 2 isn't. I'm about to order it. It can be a bit expensive. The shipping is about the same cost as the book, unfortunately. But I would say it's worth it, certainly. He knows what he's talking about. And this one includes not just how to use these plants for culinary purposes, but he goes into things like what plants can be used for cordage, like making rope and fire making and medicinal applications. And then if you really want to get into plant identification, I have a copy of Gleason's. So it's actually called Manual of Vascular Plants of Northeastern United States and Adjacent Canada. But it's the first author is Gleason's, and for these taxonomical books, you just refer to them by the last name of the first author. So you would refer to this as Gleason's. And so this book is all very technical language, and then they use dichotomous keys in order to identify plants. And dichotomous keys, basically, it slowly eliminates characteristics of plants so you can narrow in on the plant that you're talking about. And they can be very difficult to use, and you have to look at things that often require a magnifying glass and plant parts that come out at very specific times of year. And sometimes like you'll need to know about the flower and the fruit at the same time. So I don't use this. I have successfully identified plants with this book. I rarely use it. However, the companion book that goes with it, the illustrated companion, is a magical book all by itself. I love it. This book is all illustrations. And if you just like illustrations of plants, like it's worth it just for that alone. And of course, with illustrations as opposed to photographs, the illustrations can focus in on some of the details about the plants that can be hard to see in photographs. And so they can actually communicate what you're looking for in a plant a bit more easily. I have identified a couple of plants using this book, and it is I think, very enjoyable but slow process of just flipping on through. So, and these ones are relatively expensive. I think when I bought it, it was like 150 for both. I haven't seen it for anything less than 200. There's an online version they're going to come out with apparently soon through the New York Botanical Gardens. So this is for Northeastern United States and adjacent Canada. I'm sure that the equivalent exists elsewhere in the country if anyone's out west. Yeah, I wouldn't say you need those unless you want to get technical or you like illustrations. And yeah, and so next I just kind of wanted to go into a little bit about more things that you might not have thought about when it comes to where to harvest. So ideally, if you can harvest on private property, either yours or friends, that's the best, I think, in my personal opinion. Then you know what's going on the property, whether or not anything's being sprayed, whether or not there's landfill, and you can manage how much things are being harvested and not over harvest things. So yeah, things that you want to consider: pesticides, herbicides, and exhaust. So ditches, railway tracks often have, in the past, I don't know how prevalent this is still, but herbicides just sprayed to deal with weeds. And then exhaust from cars, of course. In the city, well, anywhere actually, landfill is one that some people don't necessarily think about. Yeah, you never know what's been dumped under the topsoil, or what has been dumped and then topsoil has been popped on top of. So that's something to keep in mind. And just any contamination these days. I mean, there's only so much you can do, but yeah. Okay, so for identification, the thing that I tell everyone is, like, you want to be 100% sure that you've accurately identified any given plant. This is my recommendation, and this is what I do before you consume any part of it. And I find it's an interesting exercise in being honest with myself and tuning in. For me, there's like a very clear difference in the feeling between knowing 99.9% and knowing 100%. There's like kind of like coming across someone in the street and being like, I think I met you, and then bumping into a friend and there's no question of like, of course I know you. Hey, how's it going? And I go for the 100%. I go for the I know you, didn't even have to think about it. And that's when I'll decide to, even when I'm getting to, well, especially when I'm getting to know a plant, to start tasting a little bit, putting some of that inside of my body. And so my approach, well, okay, so not only do I want to be able to identify the plant that I'm looking for, or the plant that I found that I think is edible, I also want to be able to 100% identify lookalikes. And these books, especially Samuel Thayer's books, are really good for that. He goes over pretty well the lookalikes for the plants that he goes over. And the one example that I give people often of why that's important. So obviously, you know, you have lookalikes that can make you sick. And so that's why you want to be able to distinguish between the plant that you're wanting to eat and any lookalikes. And it's important because of the example I give is wild carrots. I'm pretty sure I've positively identified wild carrots. I have not, however, positively identified poison hemlock. And it's a lookalike. And poison hemlock has a neurotoxin in it that will stop your brain from communicating with your lungs. And so you will not be able to breathe. Your heart will still beat because your heart can beat without brain signal because it has its own brain, essentially. And you'll survive if you can get on ventilator, but yeah, even a little bit can put you in a big, big trouble. So I'm waiting to have positively identified poison hemlock, and I probably even want to talk to someone that's worked with wild carrot to be able to really confirm that I know what I'm doing before I put any wild carrots inside of my body. And then, so I have a procedure that I go over when I'm trying a new plant, but just first to kind of go back to what I was saying about relationship development with these plants and community development. The process that I've gone through that I find really valuable is to get to know the plants over the course of a year. Plants can often look very different from the beginning to the end of the growing season, as well as to get to know plants over several years, especially for plants that have biannual growing patterns. So mullein is an example of that. Burdock is an example of that. They'll have like a rosette, like a small just basal leaves the first year, and then the second, sometimes third year, they'll have the flowering stalk, and so they can look really different. Other plants that are annual can look very, very different between the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And so getting to know those plants and wherever it is that you're foraging over the course of the year or a couple of years is great. And then also, if possible, you know, going back to the same place or the same area and really getting to know the community of plants. Where I'm collecting plants here, I'm less concerned now after having gotten to know the community of plants and others here about lookalikes. Like I know all the plants here that are, I know a lot of the plants here, maybe not all the plants. I know what to look for. I know where the plants that I want to consume grow very specifically. Like I'm part of a community here that's specific to this location. So really getting to know the area where you're harvesting over time is ideal. And so to go over my approach to trying a new plant, what I do is, and I get this mostly from Samuel Thayer's book. I'm not outlining it in exactly the same way he does, but basically I 100% identify a plant, not 99.9%, 100%, and then I'll take a little piece and I'll chew it up and spit it out. And I won't try anything more. I won't try any other plants, and nothing new. The next day, I'll take a little piece and I'll chew it up and I'll swallow it. And if there's nothing that happens, if I have no reaction the following day, like day 3 and on, I'll try to eat a little bit more. And the only thing to kind of keep in mind is some plants, ideally you want to cook them. Like right now, marsh marigolds are coming up, and you either don't want to eat them in quantity, you definitely want to eat them when they're young, and it can be beneficial to boil them in some water and discard the water to get rid of some of the, it's not a toxin, but it's an irritant, and I think it can be toxic in larger quantities. I don't know the name of the substance in the plant, but so not everything are you going to want to be eating raw. Yeah, okay, let me introduce you to some of my plant friends. I chose plants that 2 of them at least, I imagine everyone is familiar with. And I believe all 3, at least 2 of them are found across the country. Oh no, I need to share. I'm going to share my screen with all y'all. Okay, you can see my screen? Perfect. There we go. So yes, my first friend, burdock. There are 2 types of burdock species. So there's 2. Yeah, that's something I probably should have gone over before, but so I often use common names when I'm just talking about plants casually. I prefer it, but it's often important to not memorize, but be comfortable using the Latin names and use them as a reference. There's a bunch of plants. The common names of plants often develop as part of a local vernacular. And so there's actually different plants that have the same common name, and many plants that have many common names. And so I like using common names, but I use the Latin names, the taxonomical names, scientific names as a reference, just to double check with my field guides and my reference material that for sure we're talking about the same thing. And Samuel Thayer and Arthur Haynes both use the Latin names as well as common names. And then the more technical book is all Latin names, basically. So yeah, burdock, 2 types, common burdock and great burdock. You can consume them both. These are the ones with the burrs that make friends with everyone quite quickly. So I'm sure that you're all familiar with that. There's many different parts of the plant that you can eat. I'm just going to focus on the parts that I consume on a regular basis based on my experience. And the part that I love to consume is the flowering stalk. And so on the bottom right picture here, you can see an example. Okay, left picture, you can see the flowering stalk. So this is going to be 2nd or 3rd year. Ideally getting to them before they flower. But if it tastes good and it's soft enough to chew, eat it whenever you want. Although some of these plants in general, if there is some of their chemistry can be irritable. I don't know about burdock specifically, but in a plant, the younger it is, if there is something that might irritate you, the younger the plant, the better. The older, the more of that irritant the plant is likely to have. And so on the right here is a picture of a stalk that someone's taken, and they peel off the skin. So not only is the skin tough, but the skin is really, really bitter. Burdock is closely related to thistle, and you can do the same thing with thistle, eat the stalk in the same way. A significant difference with burdock is instead of using the prickly bits, it defends itself with a very, very sour taste on the outside of the flowering stalk and the stalks of the leaves, the petioles, and the leaves. And so, but if you take that skin off, the inside is, I can just munch it raw, no problem. It's delicious, not bitter at all. To me, it kind of has like a, I don't want to say cucumber, but that's not quite right. It's subtle and it's easy to eat and it's delicious and I quite like it. And it can be a good way to deal with the burrs before they proliferate in your yard. The other things that you can consume are, the petioles are good, and you just take off the exterior part, the skin. And I have tried that. It's not really a go-to for me. And the root, I have once dug up a burdock root. It can be a lot of effort. They go down pretty deep, and the good bit is at the bottom. And if you try to pull it without digging down all the way, it'll break off and you'll lose the really good bit. So I wish you luck with that if you are into doing that, but it's not really a go-to for me as of yet. Coltsfoot. I love coltsfoot. So coltsfoot will come, I should say with burdock, basically it'll grow anywhere in disturbed soils. So out here in the country in disturbed soils, and then in the city, I was living in downtown Montreal, and there was certainly burdock growing out of the sidewalks. So that one is a good friend to make, whether or not you want to eat it wherever you are, to make friends with it wherever you are, and perhaps work on your plant identification skills if you want to get into any of the technical aspects, since it's a plant you probably already know. Coltsfoot is also a plant that grows in disturbed earth. It likely grows wherever you are. I know it grows Quebec and Ontario and BC. I tried to confirm whether or not it grows in the prairies. I don't know, but I would be surprised if it doesn't. The flowers come up first, and then the foliage, and then there's often a second round, at least a second round of the flowers coming up later in the season. Right now where I am, so it's a bit colder where I am because I'm up in the mountains. We're about 2 to 3 weeks behind Montreal, and the coltsfoot flowers are coming up right now. And you can just eat them raw, the flower and the stalk. And every time I pass them, basically I take a little munch, and they're sweet. They have a subtle sweetness to them and a nice crunch to them, and I quite like them. That's the part that I really like to focus on. You can eat the leaves, especially the young leaves. They're a little furry on the underneath, which is one of the ways that can help you identify them. But I would just rub that off if you're going to eat them raw. They have more. I would use them more for medicinal purposes. Although I would also say that the line between food, plant food, and plant medicine is pretty blurry. So. And then my last friend, you all likely also know the cattail, which grows in ponds and streams and lakes and marshy areas. It can be recognized by its hot dog-like flowers on its spike here. This plant has so many different food items. This plant is amazing, and I love it. I love them all, but and so there's 3 things that I have more experience with. The one that I have the most experience with is the hearts of the leaf hearts, essentially. So if you pull out in this middle picture and the side picture, you can see an example of the hearts. And this is just, you pull out before the flowers come up, generally, you pull it up as much of it as you can from, so you leave the 2 exterior basal leaves, and then you can pull out the rest of it from the center, and it'll kind of pop out. And often it will leave the most tender part behind. But the amount of energy you would have to use to harvest it in a way that you get that every time isn't really worth it for me. So I just pop it out of the middle. And then the leaves, basically you're looking for the tender elastic parts. And so it's like a leek. It has a bunch of leaves kind of, around the base there, creating the stalk like a leek does. And for each leaf, you can just, from the bottom, from the white part, run your hand up that leaf until it loses elasticity. And when you get the right tension going, it'll just snap off, and you can discard the rest of the leaf that is generally dark and doesn't have any elasticity. And so the outer leaves will leave a little less material, and as you get to the heart, you'll get a bit more of the leaf material that'll still be elastic and soft. Yes, these ones I always cook. I read some accounts that you can have an allergic well, I guess a bit of an intolerance where you can get a bit of like an itchy throat, like some people, if you eat it raw, like some people get with pineapple. I have tried it raw in small quantities and I haven't experienced that myself, but I generally steam it up with other things when I consume it. And then the other two parts that I have consumed are, so the brown thing that we all are so familiar with is the flower, is one section of flowers, but there's actually two sections of flowers. The section that we're most familiar with is the female part, the seeding part. But above that, before the seeds, above that, so in the left picture here, you'll see two sections, two hot dog sections in green on these spikes. There's 3 spikes here. The top section is the male that will produce pollen, and the bottom is the female, and that's the part that will eventually turn brown and go to seed. And so you can do it with both, but I've only have experience with the male part. You can snap that section between the male and the female. On this variety, there's 2 varieties of cattail. This one, there's like a little space between the male and the female. The other variety, there will be no space, but you can still snap it. My experiences with this variety, and you can snap it without any tools, is in my experience between the 2, the male and the female. And you can take those bits, that male hot dog flower clump on the spike, and you can steam that up like corn on the cob. It's like baby corn, but in size, but adult corn, and you do have to steam it. Like, it's not going to be soft like baby corn is out of the can. And quite yummy. Apparently it doesn't have a lot of nutritional value, but I quite enjoy eating it nonetheless. And then the other thing, I haven't collected this in quantity, but I have collected some, and this year I'd like to collect some more. In this left picture on the right stalk, you can see it's starting to go to flower at the top, the male, it's starting to go yellow. And in the right picture here, you can see it flower. This you can collect the pollen from. And the pollen is high in protein and other things. It produces a great deal of pollen. So you can collect a lot of it really quickly, and you can use it as like a flour substitute or for thickening soups and for thickening things, making a soup, making like a porridgey type thing. Yeah, it's quite good. You'll have to strain it to get any like bugs out, I find. I've licked, so I haven't collected a lot in quantity, or the pollen in quantity, but I have like tasted it, and it tasted neutral. The other parts that I don't really have experience collecting are the roots, the rhizomes. So this I've read about more than anything. The rhizomes, there's a core to the rhizomes that can be collected, and a starch can be extracted from that. And then there's also kind of like the young shoots growing out of the rhizome underwater that can be collected, and they're soft and have that elasticity that you can just consume them as is, and they're quite good. So those aren't things I've really tried, but they're on my to-do list. Yeah, that's what I have to share with all y'all today.
Thank you so much, David. Those were both, that was lovely, and I'm now all excited to go out and find some cattails. So I've seen them everywhere. I never thought of them as food. So that's I love learning this new stuff. It's great. There was a couple questions, but I think we'll wait till the end and address those, if that's
Actually, because it's 10:02.
Oh.
So I think if we're okay, next week I can talk about pollinators, and it's just tying up loose ends essentially. And also I noticed that maybe it was Mary asked about the oils, and Sharon did have a piece that we were thinking about bringing forward. So maybe we can do that next week. Oh, I'm not sure, Sharon, if you're gonna be here. Hopefully you can bring it forward next week. So maybe we can go into the questions just for time's sake for today.
That sounds great.
So I did have a question for Sharon. In your presentation, you talked about the aerial parts, and I actually am not familiar with that.
Like harvesting the aerial parts.
Yeah, I think that was to do with the motherwort.
Yes, well, aerial, just think of air,
Yeah.
everything that's exposed to air, so above ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome sauce.
Easy peasy.
There were other questions. So yes.
If anyone has a question, they can raise their hand, but I'm also just going to search through the chat for a moment and see if there's anything else that I've missed.
Judy mentioned about cocktails and pancakes, and it's very fun. Okay, Anastasia, you have your hand up.
I wish to see the video of last week and the week before. Is it possible?
Yes, Philip has them because they're on the cloud. He has to figure out how to download them. So I'm meeting with Caroline this week. So that's yeah, I know that's behind, but we will have them up shortly, I hope.
Thank you.
Yes.
So
Oh, yeah.
Mary had asked, what's the difference between bulrushes and cattails? Or is it just the same name for the?
Yeah, as far as I know, that's the same plant. And like, I've never come across another plant. Like, I've heard both those names for the same plant that I presented, and I've never come across another plant with either of those common names. It could potentially exist, but as far as I know, it's two names for the same plants.
Awesome. Sharon.
David, when you started doing foraging and you realized that you couldn't do your whole diet off of that, did you have an idea of, did you go into it intensely enough to say, oh, I supplied 10% or 40%, or did you ever get to that point in your experiment?
No, I haven't gotten to that point yet. The intention is this year is to harvest in quantity more. I am gardening this year, and I am actually working at a local farm where I'll be part of what I'll be earning at the farm is my produce. So I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what percentage I can harvest from the wild here. I'll get back to you.
Thanks.
Lovely.
I'm not sure if anyone has a reference, but that would be an interesting book to find, you know, Edible Ontario or something through the months, you know, like what's in, what did they say? What's in bloom or what's growing in the month.
Season.
In season, thank you, yes. And seeing how much we could provide for ourselves just by harvesting you know, natural plants in our area, because as everyone was sharing, you know, it became, you know, I was realizing, oh yeah, there are quite a few things that I already knew about that I haven't really attempted to harvest. And I'm just realizing, actually, I'm still recording, so I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for watching.